Well, this fall we've been talking a lot about reading soil tests and some of the specific numbers and nutrients that are on those soil tests. And we've had a lot of questions come in this fall via email. We do appreciate your questions. So I'm going to ask Brian some of the tougher ones today and see how you do. All right. Why do we talk about taking a 2-foot deep sample sometime, and what can you possibly do with a 2-foot sample?
Okay, well, I wouldn't suggest you take a 2-foot deep sample. I would suggest you take in 6-inch increments. In other words, take the first 6 inches, the next 6, the next 6, and the next 6. And you don't have to do that across a whole field, but we want to at least have a few spots where you're pulling some deep cores just so you find out what's down there. Because believe it or not, chances are you've got a lot of root growth that's down there. And if you end up with a drought year, you're going to have your roots down deep, hopefully getting some moisture down at 12 inches or maybe even 20 inches deep. But if there's no plant food down there to feed those plants to go along with that moisture, you're not going to raise much of a crop. So it's at least something you need to be aware of, and maybe you start putting some fertilizer down deep. I don't know. You've got to at least see what you have down there though.
Okay, well now you talked about taking 6 inches, 6 inches, 6 inches
Yep.
all the way down. Why do we take a 6-inch sample instead of a 12? We've had a number of calls and emails about that. Some areas of the country, they like to take 12-inch deep samples. Why do we take 6 rather than 12?
Well, you can certainly take a 12. It's just that 6 is where, over the years, most of your roots are probably going to go, and most of your fertility is probably going to be placed. But, you know, I don't like to have a full 12 inches because it doesn't really tell you where your fertilizer is at. I'd rather have the first 6 inches separated from the second 6 inches, because what I'm going to assume will happen for you is you'll find that you're doing a fairly decent job in the top 6 inches in terms of fertility, but not such a good job in the next 6 inches. So why average that out? Let's find out how we're doing up above and find out how we're doing down below.
Okay, now when we're talking about soil samples, we've talked about a lot of the nutrients that are on there. Why do we take what we term complete soil sample? Why do we need the micros on there? I got a question from a guy. He said, NPK is 90% of my fertilizer bill. Why don't I just do that and I'll just throw some micros in all the time everywhere?
Yeah, you can do that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that in every single case you would have to have a micronutrient test, because I'm not that big a believer on it on our own farm in every single case. I want to know what we've got initially. I'd like to see if we're way overboard on one nutrient or another. So maybe testing that occasionally, once every 5 or 10 years, at least do that if you don't want to do it every single time.
Okay, another question, is grid sampling worth the money, or can I just do some zone sampling throughout my field?
Okay, so grid sampling is where you take a piece of ground and you're going to divide it up into equally spaced grids. With zone sampling, you're going to try to sample different soil types and different topographies separate from others. So if you don't really know what you're doing with the zone sampling, I'd suggest doing grid sampling once and then put the like grids together.
Okay, and finally, one last question. When we're doing soil sampling, do these soil samples really tell us what's available for this year, or how do we guess that?
It might, and this is the other reason why you want to run a complete soil test, because we don't just want to find out parts per million. We want to find out base saturation. We need to know the soil pH. We'd like to know cation exchange capacity. We want to see how much sulfur is out there, how many micronutrients, a lot of different things, because these all kind of tie together. So it's not just as simple as, well, I've got 200 parts per million, bam, I'm good. Okay, we don't really know that. If you're way overboard on calcium and magnesium and a whole bunch of other nutrients, then 200 parts per million on a certain nutrient might not be good enough. Or maybe it's in excess. You just need to see what else is out in your soil. And again, balance is the most important thing. It's much more important than parts per million.
Well, there's certainly a lot of things going on with soil sampling in the fall. We feel it's a very important job, one that pays you well over $100 an hour to do. So you want to get educated on soil sampling so you can do it on your farm.
And one last thing I would throw out, we would encourage you to sample your soil at least once every 4 years. So just take 25% of your acres and sample it this year, take the next 25% next year, and just keep moving that around. So that hopefully will help you cut your costs down so you're not spending all that money on soil testing every year, yet you get some data each and every year, and then when you go back you can compare, well, what was it like 4 years ago and how is it today? And then you've got some record over time.
Well, keeping that cost down on soil sampling is important, but you may want to use some of that money to do a better job controlling our weed of the week. We'll show you how coming up next.